Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today is absolutely dreadful weather-wise here. Trying to deal with it. Apparently it's going to be like this for the whole weekend, so hopefully there'll be some kind of improvement at some stage, because it's tough when you're from the south of France, that never completely leaves you. Today we're going to be talking about why it's hard for INFJs to become more extroverted, to become more social, and to live a social life. Saying that it's hard does not mean that it's something that they should avoid, of course. But I want to look a bit more into the psychological reasons for why this might be the case and the challenges associated with it. As usual, using the resources of cognitive personality and the Jungian cognitive functions. Now, before I move on with my topic, you might be expecting this, but I have written 2 books in the last couple of years. The Ecstatic Soul, my book on the INFJ, which you can get at the links below for less than $10, and my new novel, The Infant Castle. If you're into Kafka, Dostoevsky, Murakami, and a bit of INFJ weirdness, possibly an INFJ main character, protagonist, check it out. Also less than $10. I also have a Patreon page where I'm getting the very generous support of a number of patrons. It really helps me to continue running this channel, so please consider supporting me. Thank you. Now, INFJs, when you look at discussions on Reddit or other places of what types are the most introverted types, INFJs are never there. They're never at the bottom. In fact, they're never quite near the bottom. Obviously, they are in the bottom half, since in the top half, you'd obviously expect there to have the 8 extroverted types. But when it comes to the bottom half, INFJs are kind of around the middle, usually. INFPs and INTJs, for instance, are often considered to be more introverted. Nevertheless, what I want to say about this is that I think that based on observation, this is probably quite true, and there's a lot of explanation given to this in relation to the use of the FE function, the relative placement of the FE function, which is one of the most extroverted function in potential, probably in terms of social extroversion, because it's a quintessentially social function in a way which, like extrovert gathering functions like like NE and SE are only indirectly. They're not primarily social. They become social because the gatherer wants to share what he finds or she finds, but FE is very primarily social. It's what defines it. So that explains partly why the INFJ and the ISFJ are not at the bottom of those lists. Nevertheless, I want to claim that that does not mean that the INFJ does not intensely struggle with extroversion. I think that the INFJ has to face, a challenge which they know they have to face, because being relatively extroverted for an introvert is in some way their destiny, because of their psychic makeup and their typological makeup. And yet, a destiny which involves a number of quite arduous steps before complete self-realization. And I think that we can give an account of it in terms of the cognitive functions and other, phenomenological experiences of the INFJ. One thing that I want to say to begin with is that in the last few episodes, I've been talking about this concept of ethical self-respect and how it's fundamental to the very quality of life of an INFJ. I think that for an INFJ, ethical self-respect is bound up with self-respect full stop, self-esteem, and flourishing, confidence, ability to open up to others, and to live, peacefully, to be at peace with oneself. This ethical self-respect, I think that Usually INFJs seek to secure it in two possible ways, which are in part complementary, but not always. So the first way is the way of very high introversion, okay? One might even say nearly solipsistic introversion, which the NI function allows. It's both a gift and a curse in the sense that it's a gift in the sense that the INFJ is able to retreat to their own highly subjectively tinged world of perception and creates, genuinely extremely individual worldviews that they are able to inhabit. You can see that in very NI-heavy writers like Nietzsche, and Nietzsche is a paradigm example because it's almost someone who seemed to live entirely through his books and thoughts. Usually typed INTJ, but if I made a video not so long ago where I expressed thoughts along the way that, along the lines of he might actually be an INFJ. But anyway, so you'll meet people, usually you'll meet them online because the people, the INFJs in this category that you meet, that are offline, you are less likely to meet them because they're quite hermetic. They don't mix socially very much. I think they're able to gain a certain sense, at least in their view, of ethical self-respect through this idea that they're developing individually and that they're staying true to a certain sense of their vision and their prescience, and that they're in harmony with the world through that lens. And when you interact with INFJs of this kind online, you'll notice, there's something very solipsistic about them. There's something very self-contained about them, but there's also a certain sense of peace, which comes with their demeanor, and can hardly be denied, and has to be observed. So I would, in the categorization of this book, they would be considered alienated, but nevertheless alienated in a way that allows a certain kind of flourishing, even though that sounds paradoxical. Now, the other approach to ethical self-respect is, I think, the sharing of their personality and insights and vision of the world, worldview, with others, and the socializing of their uniqueness in some way, the socializing of their strangeness. Now, you can already sense why there's going to be a tension here, because on the one hand, you want to socialize, you want to engage your FE function, become less overly reliant on NI and all the possible risks that involves in terms of becoming socially isolated. But on the other hand, and you have this craving and you have this potential, because again, the FE function is quite prominent in the INFJ, but you also have this, this thing that you cannot quite rid yourself of. You can't rid yourself of it, and you shouldn't, is kind of what makes you uniquely who you are, is that this NI tinge that has been coloring your thoughts and your emotions and your personality traits ever since you were a child. So to the extent that NI is quite, first of all, it's not very common to have it as a lead function. So in the eyes of most people, it will be an unusual thing, simply by virtue of the fact that only like 5 or 6% of the population has that other as their lead function, if even, could be less. So whatever people are not used to seeing a lot, they will consider a bit stranger. But the INFJ, also the INTJ, will have accumulated NI-tinged observations, which, when congregated as a whole, seem quite, uniquely theirs, but also strange. Which means that when combined with FE, I think what happens often is that in a group, the INFJ will not only experience being seen as the strange one a little bit, but they will be acutely aware of that happening. And I think that will create some dissonance, with their sense of ethical self-respect, because they'll start asking themselves, what if I am at fault here? What if I am not well adapted? Should I be ashamed? Should I change? So the self-doubt is something that becomes very real here. And first of all, there's a temptation to retreat back to the first mode of purely relying on NI and taking yourself out of the social, right? Retreating to be by yourself, with the dangers that I've talked about. Or the challenge, which is the one that I think should be taken on, but is difficult and is not necessarily experienced by other introverts to the same extent because they don't have the same personality and cognitive functions makeup, is to continue embracing the FE function, continue engaging people, and getting your social circle to familiarize themselves with the way you are, the way the INFJ is, and appreciate their insights and release the potential. Often someone who is quite unique in a lot of the way they think is initially could be seen as a black sheep, but if they surpass this position, they could also be seen as someone to admire, an example, potentially a leader, a charismatic person. Doesn't have to be, could also be just someone to admire because they are both socially apt and uniquely individual. A lot of, very complete people are like this. And I think that's very much something that the INFJ is capable of, but it's just that in order to get there, there is this quite difficult phase of being in limbo. You're not quite completely socially like a fish in the sea, but you're also outside of your comfort zone, which can be smothering if there's too much reliance on it. I think that's why it's difficult for INFJs to become more extroverted. It's because on the one hand, there is a felt need for it. And in a broader sense, in a more general sense, nobody should be completely introverted and never mix with people. We need to interact with others. We need to find love. We need to find friendship. This is something that contributes to our flourishing. INFJs are built to be able to do this, but they're also built to see the whole socialization process through the lens of what will always remain their dominant, which is NI, and which is going to add to that strangeness, that weirdness, that haziness, which will make the process lengthy and bumpy. But if they come out of it, I think that the fruits and the rewards they get from it are quite big. And this is something that I try to explain in my book in many different ways. But I'd like to know what you think, and I would like to know what your experience is, if you're an INFJ, of the socialization process. How social are you? How would you define yourself in terms of your extroverted skills, your social skills, and how do you relate to it? Let me know in the comments, guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.